The second speaker for the Socialists and the last in this opening round is Dr. Caplan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to join my colleague Jill Vickers in thanking Sandy Shaw and her gang for organizing this fascinating but not, as I'll tell you in a moment, quite unique evening. You now today know Sandy Shaw as a great organizer of important debates. Someday you'll know her as a great Canadian sculptor. Wait for it and remember the name. It's true. Secondly, I want to thank my parents for bringing the rest of my family for that small ripple of applause that our side is getting. I asked my 11-year-old friend Jason Moore to bring some of his kids to applaud for us, and I'm sorry he didn't, because we could have had those seats filled and it would have helped my morale a lot. But still, we're going to take you on tonight. You know, it's an important historical evening. It's not the first time, it's the second time. 25 years ago on this very stage, yes, I was in third year, and I don't know who sponsored it, David Lewis and William Buckley performed. Perform is certainly the word. David Lewis, then, as always, the great voice of socialist passion and indignation in Canada, and William Buckley, fey and insouciant, newly up from Yale, his great claim to fame, his charming and noble voice of approval for Joe McCarthy and all his works. And I want to tell you, with his wit, he gave David Lewis a run for his money that night, and I'm only sorry his successors tonight are not doing the same thing, of course. I also want to say that I'm not here in my official capacity as a paid hack of the New Democratic Party, and I say that not defensively, not because of Jim Laxer, and not because of 15% in the polls. I'm not embarrassed about it. They're difficult times, but I mean, it's my job. But I want you to know I'm here in a private capacity, even though I do get a derisory sum of money for doing that job from time to time. Let's talk about the three social systems. We've talked about two. Let's talk about a third for a second that are at the essence here. And let's talk about morality, which simply means how real people live in the real world. And I feel at some disadvantage now that John Ridpath has explained that his capitalism has never existed, does not now exist, he does not know when it will exist, and therefore can show categorically how it is bound to be the best system in every way. I have some greater constraints. We have a little evidence on our side that's more ambiguous. Democratic socialism is, as Jill Vickers suggested, not a narrow ideology. It began as an unbounded faith, as a vision of a great future, as almost a religion that said, this is what the human being is capable of, that there is a way of organizing our world and believing certain things that will suppress that black part of the human soul, that will elevate that best in the human soul that's not always found in our world. And that's what socialism was going to do, and we can trace it proudly from the Old Testament and the Sermon on the Mounts, all through the Diggers and the Utopians, through European history, and it's a proud tradition. And it's an ethical proposition, and it talks, well, we're in a problem here, it talks just the way they talk. It says that people are at the center of things. Now, they said that people are at the center of things, but I heard them ending up saying that property was at the center of things, that material was at the center of things, that wealth was at the center of things, not for socialism. The touchstone is people, and people always, and the ends are clear, simple and clear. One is a belief in an egalitarian society, a belief in the moral equality of all human beings, and therefore a system that function that way regardless of background or regardless of each of our accidental attributes. Secondly, it's a philosophy that calls passionately for social justice, for the fight forever and forever for civil rights for groups and for civil liberties for individuals. Thirdly, it's a philosophy that calls for economic and social security, not just a larger cake, but a fairer distribution of the cake. My old Polish uncle used to talk about stomach socialism. Don't give me all your fancy ideas, he said. Unless people are full in their stomach, they're not going to be able to talk about dignity. And so socialists honed in on the welfare state and made that made that proudly one of the great contributions of this civilization in the era we've lived through. And finally, peace. Now, I know some of you will say that we are being self-righteous, that there are even some on their side who believe in peace. Well, there are people who espouse laissez-faire and people who espouse free enterprise, and they speak of peace, and they include the people who move back and forth between the Pentagon and the American arms movement, and they include Ronald Reagan and his trillion-dollar arms budget. I know that all of us believe in peace in the same way. I don't want to talk about communism because it's not what we're here to do. We do not believe in any socialism that is not democratic. If it's not democratic, it's not socialism. A tyrant who calls himself a socialist is only a tyrant, and anyone who thinks he's on our side or she's on our side and doesn't believe that is not on our side. But let's talk about the issue for tonight. Let's talk about capitalism. Let's say what it is. I agree with our colleagues. I agree. It's about inequality. It's about the rights of property. It's about the right to seek profit. It's about the right to exploit others in order to seek profits. It's about accepting the role of wealth and property as a gauge of power, of your power and your status. You remember a wonderful old saw from a French writer named Anatole France 100 years ago that in the sight of the law, rich and poor alike could sleep under the bridges of Paris. This is the liberty, I think, that we get from our friends. Look what they say themselves. Look what they say themselves. They've heard it here. They've written it. John Ridpath says that laissez-faire capitalism is the only social system that's based on the recognition of individual rights. Peikoff, the only alternative to tyranny that's ever been discovered. Peikoff actually says that the United States is soon going to become like Nazi Germany. Well, Ronald Reagan said last night that the United States is back. Now, what's it back to? Maybe he thinks it's back to Nazi Germany, but even I don't accuse him of that. There is a hyperbole that I can't deal with. There is a meanness that I can't deal with. There are a series of contradictions that I can't deal with. They talk about free enterprise, but every free enterprise government in the world regulates its system on behalf of business, which always and invariably benefits. They talk about laissez-faire, and they are part... Hold on, please. They talk about laissez-faire, and they are part of a moral majority that wants to dictate to us what we do about divorce, and about birth control, and about homosexuality, and about abortion, and they want to interfere with our private life. They talk about liberty, and they talk about liberty, and through all the rhetoric, here's what I hear. I hear McCarthyism. I hear the problem of the Japanese Canadians. I hear civil rights in the United States. I hear the padlock law in Quebec. I hear the War Measures Act in Canada. I hear the question of labor rights. I hear the question of torture of citizens in Central America by those who talk about individual rights, and I want to tell you that the argument for them is always made by the left, and the argument for the oppressor is always made by the right. We'll pursue it later. So much for their liberty.